Recently, the Senate Judiciary Committee decided that they were going to take up the topic of journalism and how you define what a real journalist is. Senator Dianne Feinstein was really taking the lead on this, and she had some really interesting and, in my opinion, scary things to say. So let's take a look.
I've had long-standing concerns that the language in the bill as introduced would grant a special privilege to people who really aren't reporters at all, who have no professional qualifications whatsoever. The fundamental issue behind this amendment is, should this privilege apply to anyone, to a 17-year-old who drops out of high school, buys a website for $5, and starts a blog? Or should it apply to journalists, to reporters who have bona fide credentials? This bill is described as a reporter shield bill, so I believe it should be applied to real reporters. So this amendment effectively sets up a test for establishing bona fide credentials.
So as you guys could hear, she's specifically referring to shield laws and who shield laws should protect. So if you are a journalist and you have a particular source that is giving you leaked information, if you are a so-called established, well-known journalist, well, you might be protected under shield laws. But if you happen to be a muckraker, someone who actually reports on things that might go against government authority, well, then all of a sudden you might not be protected under shield laws. And remember, there's a huge distinction between traditional media and new media. People who work in new media are not necessarily considered journalists by the establishment. So that's why this is very problematic. Having officials determine what a journalist is and telling us who can report certain things without worrying about prosecution is very problematic, at least in my eyes. However, we should have a broader discussion about what it means to be a journalist, because there might be varying opinions on that. So I want to start off with you, Axel. What were your thoughts on what Feinstein said there, and what are the ramifications of the Senate Judiciary Committee defining what journalism is?
Well, first and foremost, I don't think, I agree with you with what you say. I don't think the government should be defining what a journalist is. I mean, I think what we need to do is start defining what public officials are and what their role is. So maybe that's the approach that we take, particularly with Senator Feinstein, because I think this is a very, very dangerous point. She's talking about 17-year-old bloggers and white supremacists as you know, the danger of, well, we already have Fox News Network there, you know, so. I mean, to a certain extent, like the more that we talk about what becomes journalism and what doesn't, it allows for voices to be suppressed. And I think that that's a very dangerous approach with this type of law.
Ramon, what do you think about the suppression of different voices within the media? I mean, I think that it's very, very curious that the Senate Judiciary Committee is trying to tackle this issue now, especially given cases like WikiLeaks, given cases like Bradley Manning, given cases like Edward Snowden. All of a sudden, these politicians are like, hey, what? No, we just want to have a fair discussion about what a journalist is. I mean, do you really see this as something that's sincere and genuine, or do you see this as something that is a little Orwellian?
Well, it's very obvious that the Obama administration has gone very aggressively against people who leak things that are inconvenient to the government, excuse me. So really, I see this more as a way to cover themselves and perhaps access this information that these journalists are obtaining more easily. That's why it's difficult to take this version of the media shield law, which is being proposed, very seriously, because there are so many exceptions to it. And one of the biggest exceptions is this very vague notion that information might hurt national security. That has been used over and over and over, yet never has been proven. And that's what's going on right now with this Jay Risen case, where he's being subpoenaed, and now a federal judge says that he doesn't have those First Amendment protections. So in that case, and in the AP case, this sort of press protection legislation that politicians are trying to come up with, it doesn't really affect the journalists that are being affected the most by this government intrusion.
Let's talk a little bit about what it means to be a journalist. Now, Dave, you are a big tweeter. You love to be on Twitter, and you have really, really great information that you share with people who like to follow you. Now, on the other hand, you're also a host, and you cover news, so I would consider you a journalist. But let's say you take that out of the equation, and you're just doing what you're doing on Twitter. Do you feel that you would deserve the same shield laws as someone who works at CNN or MSNBC?
Right. So first, just just to the broader point for a second. I mean, of course, the government that nobody trusts anymore because it's proven itself to be untrustworthy is protecting the very journalists that protect them all the time. So that shouldn't surprise any of us. But to that point specifically, should Twitter be protected like everything else? I mean, I don't think just anyone that signs up for Twitter is necessarily a journalist, but generally speaking, I would give the broadest possible explanation for who's a journalist. It has so been proven that the media is failing us and not attacking power properly, and that's why a place like the Young Turks exists and shows like this and shows like mine exist because the mainstream media has failed us. So, look, it wouldn't be too many steps for Feinstein to say, well, you know what, an online news network doesn't deserve the same coverage that a cable news network deserves. And then where would all the truth that we try to bring go? It would be out the window pretty quickly.
I mean, she's already said that she doesn't believe a blogger is considered a journalist. And what does that mean? A blogger to me is someone who wants to write about the news and maybe analyze the news, but unfortunately hasn't found a job in traditional or establishment media, or doesn't want a job in traditional or establishment media, because we know what the reality is. Establishment media has to deal with corporate sponsors. They have to deal with censorship. So members of the new media, or members that focus more on digital media, have more freedom. They get to write about what they want to write about. They get to say what they want to say, which is what you see here at the Young Turks. So saying that you don't believe that bloggers are considered journalists is very, very dangerous. And another thing that I want to point out about Twitter specifically is I remember when State Senator Wendy Davis in Texas was doing her epic filibuster against anti-abortion legislation in Texas. You want to know how many mainstream media outlets were covering that? Zero. People literally took to Twitter to get live updates on what was happening on that situation. And it was because you had citizen journalists informing others. Those are people that should be protected under these shield laws. So to have someone like Feinstein say, no, those aren't journalists, is very, very dangerous. And I'm 100% against it.
Absolutely. The landscape and the outlets have changed. And apparently she's still stuck back in TV where there's 13 channels and you still dial the TV to get your news, because that's the only way that you can understand her perception of what journalism is and what information is. Journalism is about service. It's about providing a service, no matter how it comes. There are responsibilities with that, of course. Any time that you put information out there, you might as well check, if you're right about it, even though it's an opinion or not. But that doesn't disqualify people from being journalists or not. I think that danger, as she pointed out, is tremendous.
And just 10, 15 years ago, you're talking about kind of what journalism used to look like. 10, 15 years ago, we had no idea the impact that bloggers were going to have politically, many times doing a lot more hard-hitting pieces than even I would. And I've been to journalism school and I've been working for TV networks for 10 years. So in this day and age, the way that technology is changing and the way that the economics of the news business are changing, pretty much anyone with a phone camera could be considered a journalist. I mean, we constantly see TV stations asking viewers, send us your photos, because they're reducing their photographer staffs. We see newspapers laying off their entire photography staffs, completely relying on citizen reporters. Even CNN has their iReport. So when we move forward and create these laws, we have to know that the journalism of the future is going to look much different.
Yeah, the iReport's actually a great example, because when something happens, there's a hurricane somewhere, there's a terrorist attack somewhere, immediately help us out with the iReport. Well, because there are people on the ground that are actually doing the reporting. But going to Feinstein, this is purely about access. She knows if she protects the reporters that work for cable news and the mainstream outlets, that they won't ask her the questions she doesn't want to be asked.
Absolutely.
But you can't control all the bloggers. You can't control all the people on Twitter. So she has no vested interest in protecting them, because those are the ones that are going to actually ask her the questions.
And furthermore, you actually give the power to both government and corporations to define what this industry is all about, to define what the service is all about. And that's just wrong in so many levels. That squashes voices. The internet has become more democratic, and there's more voices that speak out on multiple levels. And the minute that you try to put these voices in buckets, you're completely diminishing exactly what this is all about.
Yeah, it's especially concerning that Dianne Feinstein or any politician would try to define the profession of a journalist, especially since it is really the only profession which is protected in the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, definitely. And I see journalists as a balance of power power within our political system. And if you get rid of that balance of power, I think that disastrous things can happen. I mean, fortunately, we have new media to mitigate the establishment media at this point. And seeing politicians trying to stomp on that is really scary stuff. Now, do you guys think that there are limits to who is or who can become a journalist? I mean, is it fair to say that anyone with a Twitter account can start tweeting anything and say, yeah, I'm a journalist? So definitely, I deserve the same rights.
I think maybe it has to do with just maybe we're focusing on the word journalist too much, because that somehow implies that you went to school for journalism or you got some sort of degree for journalism. I didn't go to school for journalism. I went to school for political science, so that's kind of close, but not really. Yet I do consider myself a journalist now just by a function of what I do. So I don't think we should get too hung up on the word as much as if you're someone that's trying to be part of a legitimate discourse and ask the right questions and all that, then you should be protected as much as someone else that's already protected just because they work for the right people.
You might disagree of what people post. You might disagree on what they tweet about. You might disagree on what they blog about. But that doesn't mean that they don't have the right to say what they have to say. You know, and I think that that's important. Part of journalism is a responsibility. It's a service based on responsibility. And so, you know, if you call, there's many voices out there. There's millions and millions of Twitter users, billions now in the world. So not everyone is going to be taken seriously because not everyone has something serious to say. But those that really are doing their job and they're being very responsible, you know, are being taken seriously. And I think that that's how we define what that responsibility is all about.
Yeah, and this, and you bring up a good point, Dave, of, you know, focusing more on the actual process of journalism and collecting this information and presenting it to your viewers, whoever it is. I mean, there's this debate even within journalistic circles. The Society of Professional Journalism recently voted on a resolution whether to change their name from professional journalist to professional journalism, because even in that institution, there are authors, there are PR people, there are documentarians who don't traditionally work every day as a journalist, but from time to time, they put out hard-hitting and really vital information that the public needs to disseminate and really needs, you know, would they not be protected by shield laws like this? So that's why it is really troubling to kind of try to define it in such narrow terms.
Also, just in terms of Twitter specifically, you know, anyone that I follow that's a mainstream news reporter, I never feel like I'm getting truth from them, really. They're telling me a certain set of facts about something, but all the people that I truly respect on Twitter, actually most of them are comedians because you're getting some sort of angle on the truth that's usually a little bit closer, and truth is best told funny. Or there's, you know, some other people that are on the fringes of politics that I think are truthful. The news people or the news organizations, if you look at CNN's Twitter feed, you're not getting a lot of truth, you're just getting a certain set of facts that they're okay with. And these guys all want to go, you know, it's like the White House Correspondents' Dinner. These guys all want to go to the parties with the politicians. So you're not going to talk shit about a guy if at the same time you're trying to get invited back to the party.
Yeah, there's this obsession with access. There's this obsession of being part of that bubble. I do want to close this conversation by talking about ethics a little bit, because I think that one thing that differentiates a good journalist from a bad journalist is one who actually believes and follows certain ethics. And I want to get, I mean, there are no wrong or right answers, but I want to get your thoughts on what appropriate journalistic ethics are. I'll start with you, Axel.
Well, ethics is not getting a PR press release and reporting on it, and then the rest echo chamber reports the same way and delivers the same talking points. That's not ethics. That's not reporting. That's not investigative reporting. And that's certainly, you know, a brand of journalism that could or could not be taken seriously, but that's unethical in my point of view. So I think ethics is based on that service, on that responsibility of really getting to the truth and honesty and portraying it in an honest way without hiding stuff for other agendas and issues. As long as you're straightforward and your voice is straightforward, I think that's ethical.
Yeah, and I just take a couple of points from the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. A couple that I try to maintain on a daily basis is being a watchdog over government. Having this free press without so many restrictions is paramount to having a true democracy here in the U.S. And again, to not distort the facts and the truth. A lot of times, you know, people will edit things for their own agendas, and that's called propaganda. As a journalist, you have to give people the proper context and not alter the information that you're giving them.
Yeah, I would say ethics basically are just being intellectually honest, which so few reporters are. You know, even someone like Wolf Blitzer, who's on CNN 28 hours a day, the guy could not ask a follow-up question if his life depended on it, because he has his paper in front of him with his set answers. So no matter what they say, he just goes to the next question. I know we're going to talk about Iran in a little bit, but you know, Christiane Amanpour just sat down with Rouhani, and she asked him about the Holocaust, and he says, well, I'm not a historian. And then instead of her saying, well, it is a fact that it happened, that is a historical fact, you don't have to be a historian to know what a fact is and what history is, she immediately goes on to the next question, which in a way it almost validates what he's saying. You know what I mean? Like, he puts it out there, and then instead of any pushback, you're just letting it go. So I think honesty is ultimately what the most important thing related to integrity is.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be fearless. Don't be afraid to lose the access. If you lose the access, it's not the end of the world. I think that actually speaks volumes, as opposed to always getting that access whenever you want it. And you know, the one thing that I try to instill in the journalism students that I'm teaching now is don't try to follow this model that's been laid out for you and it's been used for decades. Create your own path and be fearless about it.